Part 3. The powerful, rhythmic sound of drums came from the side of the village, filling the entire battlefield. All the eyes which went to the source of the sound went wide in the next instant. That was because an army of over 5,000 people was moving in lockstep formation, advancing in time with the beat of the drums. At first, both Prince Barbro's forces and the defenders of Kugane village thought that they were reinforcements from Barbro's side, the sole difference being whether or not they had expected such backup. However, the forms of the new troops immediately told them that it was not the case. The members of that army were all goblins. The demi-humans known as goblins were smaller than human beings, only about the size of a child. However, their presence made them seem twice as large as they actually were. In addition, they were sheathed in gleaming steel. They bore potent, brightly polished weapons and armor, the equipment a warrior ought to have. These were not peasant levies. This was an army of true warriors. Now, anyone who's still alive, run like hell. They're reinforcements. Reinforcements have come. Run to them. Kugane shouted at the top of his voice. Their identities were a mystery. He did not know if they were a friend, foe, or a completely unrelated third party. Telling the serving defenders to flee in their direction because they were of the same species was not the right thing to do. He should have told them to run back into the village. However, Kugane had a feeling which one might call sympathy. He had the feeling that he shared the same master as those people. He had the feeling that they would take him and his friends in, and protect everyone. The serving citizens of Kugane village fled toward the goblin army without hesitation. The encirclement was beginning to crumble. The royal army knew that they ought to pursue, but their movements were slow. That was only to be expected. There was a highly regimented army out there. Approaching it carelessly was dangerous. There were two reasons why they let them flee. The first was because they felt that it would be better to consolidate and form up rather than mount a pursuit. Their drums were pounding a signal to fall back. The second was because they were afraid that they would suffer terrible revenge for killing members of the same species as that army. The goblins happily accepted Kugane and the others as they ran over to them. Kugane and the rest entered through gaps in their relaxed formation. After everyone had entered, they immediately closed ranks once more, like a door shutting. Kugane looked around at his exhausted comrades, who were collapsed on the ground. Nobody had made it out unscathed, and many people had promptly passed out upon reaching safety. He looked around, and it was tragic. The number of goblins, ogres and villagers had decreased. Still, more than half of them survived. We're lucky. Kona. He called the name of the only person among the goblins who could use healing magic, the priest Kona. However, Kona shook his head, indicating that he had exhausted his healing magic in that battle. Then let's do whatever first aid we can. Just as Kugane was about to shout, he saw a goblin in a turban, carrying a scarf, and stroking his whiskers. Given his attitude, he was most likely a central figure in the goblin army. Ho 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 ho. You must be General Henry's retinue. I am the goblin strategist, responsible for commanding the goblin army. Now that we have arrived, nobody will harm you gentlemen any further. Please be at ease. Our medical corps will attend to you forthwith. The goblin strategist waved his fan, and a squad of brawny goblins ran up with boards in hand. Come, come, everyone, please lie on these boards and we will ferry you off. Now that we have come, it would be a shame if any more of you were to lose your lives. The casualties were carried off one after the other. You have been hurt too. Come, we shall take you to our surgeons for treatment. No, I'm sorry. I feel bad about declining your kindness, but can you please tell me what's going on? I'm still alright. Kugane's attitude did not look like he was acting tough. After verifying that, the goblin strategist nodded and began speaking. I expected nothing less of the leader of General Henry's retinue. What do you wish to ho ho ho? No, I already know. General Henry is in a command tent in the rear. She will surely be glad to see that you are fine. Is that so? Then that's good. Kugane let out a soul-deep sigh of relief. In fact, he was so relieved that the strength fled his body as well, and his knees nearly buckled under him. However, as a predecessor, he could not let his successors see that unsightly side of himself. Right. I'll go to see her, then. Besides, I doubt there'll be anything left for us to do in the upcoming battle. Ho 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 ho. Thank you for yielding the field to us newcomers. As if. It's nothing much. It's the job of the seniors to pass the torch on to their juniors. Thank you. Ho ho ho. Then, we must display our prowess to our seniors. That being the case, all that remains for us is to achieve victory. Order the heavy infantry forward. What the hell is that? Damn it, we were so close. Barbro's eyes went wide as he surveyed the interlopers who had ruined everything. Nothing had gone as he had planned. Why was he deadlocked with a goblin army at a tiny village like this? He was so frustrated that he wanted to claw at his hair. If this were an Imperial Army detachment, he would gladly order his men to fight. However, these were goblins. Even if he won, who would praise him? My prince, please allow the men to fall back. He glared angrily at the knight addressing him. Rationally speaking, they ought to fall back now. While he did not know what such a large goblin host was doing here, as long as he brought the information back, it ought to count as achieving something. However, running away with his tail between his legs without so much as fighting them would surely lead to him earning the hateful moniker of the prince who fled from goblins. And if he lost, then he would be the prince who was beaten by goblins. The topic starved nobles would surely spread it all around and make it public knowledge. The people who had not seen the battle with their own eyes would not care how strong the goblins before him were. They would only be concerned by how amusing it sounded. Within his heart, Barbro cursed those nobles who mocked him from safety. Denied. Keep fighting, Your Highness. Please observe their equipment and their regimented formation. They must surely be elite troops who are the equal or superior of the goblins from just now. Our side is largely composed of peasant levies. Our chances of victory are slim. I beg you to order a retreat. Barbro knew that as well, even if the other party did not say anything. However, there was no other way to protect his good name than by fighting. All he could do now was pray that those goblins were just for show. You fool! Do I have to tell you how dangerous it is to let those troops be? Right now, the Royal Army is making their way to the Cat's Plains. What do you plan to do if that army attacks Irantel while they're undermanned? Ununderstood. They would cross blades with the enemy once. If they were as tough as their appearances suggested, he would fall back immediately. The battle with the Empire was the truly important thing, and Barbro did not want to be defeated here. He was at least calm enough to think of that. The soldiers formed up into ranks before Barbro. As though matching their movements, the goblins began their advance. The enemy had taken a long snake formation, which was 3 layers deep. Barbro's forces had adopted a crane wing formation instead. They had not used the fish scale formation because they wanted to make effective use of their powerful cavalry, and the enemy formation was poor at handling flanking attacks. The leading edge of the goblin formation was composed of their heavy infantry, carrying great shields that were tall enough to cover themselves. Their immaculate battle line was like a wall bearing down on them, and it placed great pressure on Barbro. The hand holding the reins of his horse were slippery with sweat under his gauntlets, and it felt disgusting. When the spear-wielding levies made contact with the shield-bearing heavy infantry, his troops would block the enemy advance, effectively treading on the serpent's head, and then the cavalry would charge from the flanks. The levies clashed with the heavy infantry, and then, the loud voices of the goblins reached Barbro's ears. We are the subordinates of Her Excellency, General Henry the Goblin Heavy Infantry. Do not insult us by thinking we will be halted by this much. Rather than harboring doubts about this General Henry person, Barbro was focused on how his force's formation was buckling under the contact. The levies were being pushed back by the enemy shields. Naturally, when they were pushed back, they collided with their comrades behind them, and their formation began to collapse. The cavalry on both flanks hurriedly sprang into action. The right wing was slightly quicker to move, and they aimed to attack from the side. However, cavalry in gleaming silver emerged from the enemy flank riding white wolves in place of horses, 17 riders in all, sprinting forth to intercept them. "We are the subordinates of Her Excellency, General Henry the Goblin Paladin Corps. We pledge our loyalty to Her Excellency." From the left flank came a horde of magical beasts that looked like wolves, who raced across the land. There were goblins mounted on them. Leading the way was a winged wolf, and the goblin mounted on its back shouted loud enough to drown out the wails of the levies and reach Barbro's ears. "We are the subordinates of Her Excellency, General Henry the Goblin Beast Rider Corps. Here we come." As the cavalry were bogged down in melee, Barbro heard the sound of strings twanging, one after the other. He saw dozens of arrows falling from the sky like rain, peppering the chaotic battlefield. Barbro wanted to see who was shooting, and surveyed the enemy formation. They were in the enemy's second rank. There he saw a group of goblins dressed in bright red, wielding huge bows. There was a clear difference between the sizes of the left and right sides of their bodies, and their bodies tilted noticeably with every step they took. One of them was particularly eye-catching and carried an extra-large bow. He opened his mouth. "We are the subordinates of Her Excellency, General Henry the Goblin Longbowman Corps. Know that there is no escape for you." That was not the end of the enemy's long-ranged attacks. The enemy's third rank discharged several spells, which detonated within the Royal Army's formation, some distance ahead of Barbro. Great flashes of light accompanied the blossoming of crimson flowers, and the petals of scorching flame drove a shockwave before them, the repeated explosions flinging the peasant levies away. The spellcasters were a group of whose faces were veiled by their lowered hoods. Each of them carried the long staff, which gleamed with a mysterious radiance. The person at their head pulled back his hood, revealing a face covered in wrinkles. "We are the subordinates of Her Excellency, General Henry the Goblin Magic Support Corps. Be it strengthening, weakening or attack magic, we wield them all with the same proficiency." They were not the only unit casting spells. Barbro shifted his eyes to the side of the Magic Support Corps, and he saw a similar-looking unit there. Although they were only a team of 5 people, each of their faces was filled with an absolute confidence. Before them stood the one with the boldest smile of all, and he shouted with all his might. "We are the subordinates of Her Excellency, General Henry the Goblin Arcane Artillery Squad. We who specialize in area attack spells are the most potent attackers of the Goblin Army. Your Highness." The knight returned to Barbro's side. He knew what the man was going to say with just a look at the shocked expression on his face. With magic casters in their ranks, the enemy was even more dangerous now. "We've had it. We can't hold them. It's only a matter of time before the enemy reaches us. We need to retreat." He could not deny him now. Even if Barbro ordered everyone to stay and fight, the nobles who came with him would climb over each other to flee. Even if he somehow compelled them all to fight, they would resent him and become future enemies. "Do it. Also, order the Baron to run first." Barbro wanted to be the first to flee, but if he did that, it was not hard to imagine how he would be labeled as a coward who was number 1 at running from goblins. That being the case, he would let the Baron bear that shame instead. Understood. Just as the knight began barking orders to his subordinates beside him. "There's no escape." An unfamiliar voice came from right beside him, and for the first time, Barbro felt that his life was actually in danger. His retinue drew their swords and surveyed their surroundings, and they saw a group of black-clothed people emerge from the shadows. Their faces were covered with cloth, but their eyes gleamed with a keen light. "We are the subordinates of Her Excellency, General Henry the Goblin Assassin Squad. We lurk in the shadows, and this is the last time you will see us." There was one more person. He emerged like he had been drawn out. He wore a red cap and steel boots. The way he carried a long scythe made him look like the Grim Reaper. I am a subordinate of Her Excellency, General Henry, one of the 13 redcaps who serve as her bodyguard. Well, I guess there's nothing left for me to do. Protect His Highness. Sound the retreat. Pathetic. To Barbro's eyes, it seemed as though the shadows were moving. Everything above the knight's neck disappeared in an instant, and his blood spurted like a geyser. Barbro realized what he was looking at, and he immediately spurred his horse into a gallop. There was no longer any time to worry about the order in which to run. Right now, he was treading the edge of life and death. Behind him, he heard, "We are the subordinates of Her Excellency, General Henry." The goblin musician squad, accompanied by the sound of pounding drums, and it grated on his ears. Is it really all right to let him run? The strategist Ono ordered it. If the prince's head is taken, they'll scour the land to find where it fell. But of course, if General Henry fell to the enemy, I wouldn't stop killing until they were all dead either. Well, that's the strategist Ono for you. He sees the big picture. Is that why he didn't order us to wipe them all out? Precisely. We need to let them take their prince back to their city. I'm not happy about it either. I want to make them pay for attacking General Henry's village. I guess that's how it is, Redcap Ono. We'll begin cleaning up the corpses then. Indeed. We need to recover the bodies of the brave warriors who fought by our senior's side too.